We are paid, that's all. We are God.
Hey guys! This is Uruzi and I'm back with part 6 of What If Naruto Was a Simple Teenage Shop Owner. Things aren't always as simple as they seem. Just because he found himself in a new world, Naruto shouldn't have forgotten this. Now he must deal with fallen angels, devils, perverts and God, all while maintaining a relationship and running his store. Things can never be simple for him. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe and check the author in the description. Let's start. Chapter 22. There were a lot of things that Kaneko loved about her boyfriend. In all honesty, the things that she thought she disliked about him were minor faults that she had grown to endear. It was just, the way he went about doing certain things made him absolutely infuriating to be with. For example, his kindness. The blonde was unimaginably kind to almost every single person he interacted with. She loved that about him. What she didn't love about it was the fact that he had to be so kind to every single person around him, which included well-endowed females. Asia Argento. The Nekasha knew she shouldn't ever feel any type of anger towards the girl. The girl still acted like an angel even though she was a devil. Everything from her features to her mannerisms made it almost impossible to not like the young girl. But, Kaneko managed to do just that when her fellow devil decided to intrude on her territory. Her territory being one overly helpful blonde. It was completely and honestly innocent and Kaneko knew that. It seemed that Asia had had such a fun time learning how to bake under Naruto during their first meeting that the devil had come crawling back for more. It definitely didn't help that Naruto had basically guided the depressed and wanting girl into his kitchen with open arms, a wide smile and supportive words. Not that much Sue, a small explosion brought the devil out of her thoughts. She turned towards the other end of the bar where she was meted with the somewhat infuriating sight of Asia and Naruto covered in an absurd amount of sugar. Silence reigned true for several long seconds before the duo of blondes erupted in a fit of giggles and chuckles, unknowingly sending Kaneko deeper into her agitation. Not even funny. The girl ended up mumbling beneath her breath, unable to inwardly contain her anger anymore. Her low-spoken words caught the resident god's attention as the gothic-dressed loli moved her attention over to the Nekasha. Ophis said absolutely nothing as she remained silently staring at Kaneko, agitating the girl even further. The staring continued for a full minute until the young Nekasha could no longer contain her anger. "Stop looking at me!" the girl growled out to the god. She knew she had made a mistake the second the words left her mouth as Ophis actually visibly reacted to her words. The god blinked her eyes a single time before a deep scowl overcame her face. The angry look only lasted for a second, but in that second, a series of disturbing mental images flashed through Kaneko's head. Her death, torture, Naruto's death, and even her sister were just the subjects of a few of her thoughts. The visions lasted for only a second before Ophis' expression changed back to her usual, neutral self. "You reek of envy," the god stated before switching her attention away from Kaneko. The Nekasha blinked rapidly as she attempted to comprehend the events that had just taken place inside and outside her head. It took several seconds for her fear-riddled mind to recover before she was able to talk. "What did you just say?" the girl questioned in a demanding tone, as if the god sitting in front of her hadn't just sent her a literal death glare. Ophis shot a side glance back towards Kaneko briefly before straightening her gaze. "The sin. I can feel it flowing from your skin. The scent of it is repulsive," Ophis replied, not even bothering to look at the Nekasha while she talked. Kaneko seemed to take offense to this as the young devil almost shot up from her seat. It was only the more rational portion of her brain that kicked in and saved her from doing stupid by forcing her to remain in her seat. "I am not envious," Kaneko quickly shot back. It was too late though, as Ophis was far past listening to the girl, leaving the Nekasha alone to stew in her own anger. Another bout of giggles coming from Asia forced the young devil's attention back towards the blonde duo. The newest member of Ria's peerage now had an animal-shaped cookie cutter in hand and was going to town on a pan filled of dough. Standing by her side, his smile bright as ever, was her boyfriend. The scene brought a whole new spike of emotions into the devil as she slumped her head down onto the bar. "I'm not jealous," Kaneko muttered in a feeble attempt to convince herself that Ophis wasn't right. It didn't work. The amount of awkwardness taking place within the Grigori headquarters couldn't even begin to be described by words. The tension in the room was thick enough to be choked on. A single spark could have set the room alight. And you wouldn't have been able to tell any of this from the look on Azazel's face. The man was grinning ear to ear as he looked at the people around him. This is a nice family reunion. The man's comment earned him the agitated glares of the 3 other angels present. The distasteful looks went ignored by the man as he continued smiling as bright as ever. You haven't changed a bit, Azazel. The odd man in the group spoke out. His comment earned him a bashful chuckle from the fallen angel leader and apathetic glances from his 2 generals. What are you doing here, Michael? Barakiel spoke up, cutting straight to the chase. The leader of heaven directed his attention towards the jaded fallen angel with his ever-serene smile placed on his lips. I just came to talk with my brothers, was the angel's response. Barakiel visibly twitched in response to the vague answer while Shemhazai was much more vocal in his comeback. The fallen angel shot up from his seat in a rushed state. His wings flared out behind him as his essence began to fill the room. The man's eyes seemed to want to glare a hole into the present angel as he leaned towards Michael. Do you honestly think you can just walk into our territory and act this casual? I don't care if this idiot let you in, we will be shown respect on our land. The man barked out as he flexed his power throughout the room. Michael didn't look to be the slightest bit perturbed by his actions as he remained sitting in his seat as calm as ever. The angel's calmness did little to calm the man as Shemhazai looked seconds away from leaping at him. Sit down. 2 words from Barakiel was all it took to calm his fellow fallen angel. Shemhazai glanced back at his longtime friend and saw the man staring directly at Michael. He then glanced back at the angel, his anger still visible in his movements. Despite his body language, he said nothing further as he slowly lowered himself back down to his seat. Michael. Barakiel spoke up once again, catching the attention of his untainted brother. The leader of heaven glanced over to his stoic sibling and met eyes with the man. Barakiel. The angel spoke out, his voice a heavenly mixture of calm and harmonious. The man's voice would have been enough to tame the wildest of beasts. It was one of the reasons why Michael was well loved by his own people and in the diplomatic world. His voice just had a special effect on people and the man definitely used that to his advantage. Unfortunately for him, he was dealing his siblings, the people who had dealt with the effects of his voice since birth. Things wouldn't be as simple as they usually were. While I am not as hot-headed as Shemhazai. The man stopped in his speaking to send a side glance at his fellow fallen angel. Shemhazai huffed in response and looked away, refusing to meet his brother's eyes. I do agree with his reasoning. So I advise that you say what you have to say before I lose what little patience I have and forcibly evict you. If I had known you two would be so hostile, I would have brought Gabriel along with me. I'm sure she would have calmed you both down. Michael shot back immediately. His comment earned him a hearty chuckle from Azazel, but that was put to a quick end by a twin set of glares from his fellow fallen angels. The duo looked to be about to turn on Michael, but he spoke up again before they could. Jokes aside, my brothers, I do come here for a set purpose. Recently, I've been discussing with Azazel about a dual agreement that will work towards the benefit of both of OU. The angel trailed off as an interesting sight captured his attention. Shemhazai seemed to have teleported across the room and now had Azazel in a headlock. All this time we've been doing your work while you've been talking with Angel Boy over here? I've signed 200 fucking papers in the past 3 days, you idiot. Shemhazai yelled into Azazel's quickly reddening face. The man looked as if he was attempting to apologize, but the only thing coming out of his mouth was a loud wheeze. You guys really haven't changed one bit. Michael chuckled out as he watched the fallen angel duo go at each other. Barakiel couldn't help but sigh and cover his face in an attempt to mask his embarrassment. It shamed him to admit that the angel's statement was mostly true when it came to the trio. Azazel was still as idiotic as he was as a child, Shemhazai was still a massive hothead and he was himself. There was no changing that. While I would love to sit here and watch this all day, we must seriously talk. Michael's words managed to calm Shemhazai down enough to relinquish his hold on Azazel's neck. Barakiel brought his head out of his hand to look at the now serious angel. Our kinds have been at each other's throats for years. Even with this ceasefire in place, animosity between us hasn't calmed a bit. We are dying as a species, and I do mean we. You all may have fallen out of our Father's grace, but that does not mean I still do not care for you all. I know all three of you care for the people beneath you and do not wish to see them fade away. For once, all three of the fallen angel leaders were paying rapt attention to the same thing. There was very little that could accomplish that feat, and Michael was one of the few things. He had inherited that quality from his father. The man could capture the attention of any living creature within hearing range of him with a single word. Though, that's probably a byproduct of him being a god. I feel the same towards my own people. This senseless cycle of slaughtering one another needs to end. This separate way of living has only filled our kind with bitterness and strife. We must end it. And, by end, I do mean truly end it. No ceasefire or temporary truces. Just true peace. And how do you propose we do that? It's not as simple as just getting all the big players together at a table, shaking hands with each other, and then we suddenly have peace. It suddenly doesn't just form out of thin air. Shemhazai chimed in, clearly disenfranchised with the blonde's way of thinking. Actually, it can be that simple. Michael shot back. Peace is abstract. There is no set formula for creating it. Trust me, I've searched for one. It comes about through the actions of those who support it. If we, and by we I mean including the devils, strive for true peace, it can be easily acquired. You mean to make peace with the devils? The very creatures that cringe at the mention of our Father's name and grace? I rarely agree with Shem, but I cannot help but hesitate at that idea. Barakiel spoke. It is true peace if we exclude a third of our religion's factions. Despite our differences, they must be included. Even Michael looked less than comfortable about the idea of including the devils. Though, if the man was prepared to put aside his distrust for his corrupted brothers and sister, the fallen angels knew he was serious. Speaking of religion, are the false god and their worshippers going to be taking place within this peace? Shemhazai questioned. Azazel and Michael shared a brief look with each other before a chuckle left both of their mouths. Let's take it one, small, baby step at a time. Michael's response earned him a small laugh from Shemhazai and even a smirk from Barakiel. The room quickly descended into silence, a much more comfortable one, as the brothers basked in each other's presences. It had been decades since the group of four had been together, so the experience was somewhat surreal for them all. So, Shemhazai was the one to break the momentary silence between the group. How do you plan on getting the devils to listen? Just getting an audience with them would be hard enough. I know their current leader is considered liberal in comparison to the older generation, but I doubt they'll be jumping at the opportunity to speak with us, even under the guise of a truce. This is where my genius and I shine. Azazel spoke up for the first time in the meeting. His words earned him an eye roll from each of his brothers as the man stood from his chair with a mammoth-sized grin on his face. I just so happen to have identified a factor shared among the three factions. And with this factor by our side, I'm sure the devils will be happy to listen to us. And what is this factor you speak of? Barakiel questioned, somewhat doubtful that a single object could convince the devils to speak with them. A little blonde that Michael and you both have had some personal experience. Azazel looked beyond giddy as the words left his mouth. Shemhazai and Barakiel physically flinched at the mention of their defeat while Michael managed to contain his reaction to a slight cough. You tried talking to that bastard too? Shemhazai asked to Michael. The angel refused to meet his brother's stare as he instead focused his attention down onto the table while a blush began to spread across his cheeks. Yes sir, he did. From what I heard, Naruto apparently broke into heaven, got arrested and handcuffed, then managed to break out. And guess who captured and then subsequently failed to recapture him? Our big bro, of course. Azazel's loudly proclaimed. Michael looked close to dying as he lowered his head completely down onto the table. Shemhazai had left his chair in favor of floor as his laughter filled the room. Barakiel was the only one who remained sat upright in his chair, his face set in its usual neutral mask. Our friend has been getting around a lot recently, especially with the devils. I plan to speak with him soon about our plan. I'm almost positive he'll jumping in joy at the idea. Azazel added on. And what makes you so sure of that? Barakiel spoke, seeing as he was the only other person in the room that seemed capable of talking. Shemhazai was still on his floor, now clutching onto his stomach as his laughter flowed freely from his lips while Michael refused to lift his head from the table. Oh, trust me. I know. Me and him are best friends after all. What a day. Naruto yawned out as he opened the front door to his house. Ophis immediately glided past him and made her way onto the couch where she opted to put her headphones on in order to block out the world. Kaneko stood silently behind Naruto as the blonde made his way into the living room. "I think I'm going to call it a day," the shinobi said out loud as another yawn forced its way out of his mouth. His response came in the form of silence from his two housemates. The blonde paid the silence no mind as he trotted his way over to his bedroom. It didn't take the blonde long to cross the distance between his living room and his bedroom. He unceremoniously kicked the door open to the room where he proceeded to take 2 steps into it before collapsing face first into the bed. The teen let out a loud, pleasurable groan as he rubbed his face into his blankets. After a long day of work, the softness of his bed was always a comforting feeling. The blonde was so engrossed in feeling up his blanket with his face that he didn't notice that Kaneko had followed him to his room. He also didn't notice the uncanny look in her eyes as she activated the lock on the bedroom door. Lemon. Eventually Kaneko couldn't keep her grip and collapsed back down to her bed, relinquishing her hold on the blonde. Naruto was quick to follow her, falling directly next to her with a loud sigh. Silence filled the room as the duo laid staring at the ceiling. A small smile could be seen on both of their faces as they basked in the afterglow of their sex session. "You two are loud." The moment of silence came to an extremely abrupt end as a voice cut through it. Naruto shot up from the bed in a near instant, his face a mask of surprise and shock at the voice. Kaneko remained lying, her recently agitated look slowly migrating back onto her face due to the voice. "What the hell, Ophis? Why are you in my room?" Naruto screamed at the god standing in his now open doorway. The dragon remained silent for several seconds as her eyes traveled down the length of the blonde's exposed body. Her eyes seemed to settle on his now flaccid cock, something that Naruto took notice of as he quickly grabbed a pillow to cover himself with. "I'm in here because you are loud. My headphones couldn't block out your noises." Ophis' reply was simple as she redirected her gaze at Naruto's face. A blush quickly made its way there as the blonde couldn't help but be slightly embarrassed at their loudness. Kaneko didn't seem very embarrassed as she rose up from her laying position to look at Ophis. The god paid the girl little mind as she instead focused her attention on the room. "It reeks of pheromones in here. You two are covered in it," the god stated monotonously as she glanced around the room. The blush on the blonde's face grew even brighter with the statement. Kaneko seemed to take pleasure in the god's words as she scooted closer to Naruto before beginning to rub herself against his leg. "Good. Now you know what's mine and what is not yours," Kaneko stated matter-of-factly. Her comment caused Ophis to lock eyes with the girl, initiating a stare-off. Naruto was caught in the middle of it as the two lolas attempted to burn a hole into each other's head. Kaneko's eyes were narrowed into a deadly sharp slit while Ophis' wide-eyed stare seemed to almost radiate agitation. Their stares clashed, creating a powerful mixture of tension that filled the room completely. "I'm going back. Be more quiet," Ophis stated while keeping eye contact with Kaneko. This continued for several seconds before the god abruptly turned her back on the duo and trotted out the room. Inwardly, the Nekasha couldn't help but give herself a mental cheer. Even though she doubted the god would admit it, she had won that battle of wills. That was a huge achievement for her. What was that about? Kaneko rolled her eyes at her boyfriend's questions. Sometimes he really wasn't the smartest or the brightest or the most intelligent or even the most aware. She learned to overlook this though for his more appealing traits. His warmth, for example. That was why she yanked hard on his leg, causing him to lose balance and fall back onto the bed. As soon as his body hit the bed, she immediately crawled next to him and snuggled into his side. Even with his certain level of cluelessness, Naruto knew what to do in a situation like this. He wrapped his arm around the girl's body and made himself comfortable within the sea of pillows and blankets. Knowing Kaneko, he was going to be here for a while. A small snore shot out of the girl, signifying her return to unconsciousness and making him release a small chuckle. He was going to be here for a long while. Chapter 23. She was angry. She didn't know why, but she knew she was angry. Anger was an emotion she rarely felt. She didn't feel many emotions, to be completely honest, but anger was one of the rarest. Even the Great Red couldn't push her far enough to make her truly angry. At best, all he was an annoyance. An annoyance that would be swiftly taken care of. But this wasn't just some mere annoyance. An annoyance could be ignored until it was properly taken care of. An annoyance didn't make you want to completely eradicate its existence from the face of the planet. An annoyance didn't conjure up a huge well of anger and frustration that took every single ounce of her rather limited willpower to control. The Nekasha. She was the indirect of her anger. She knew it and the girl knew it. The blatant looks that she was sending her reeked of satisfaction and relishment. The cat demon clung to Naruto's side like a leech, absorbing every single ounce of attention and affection he had to offer when in the shop. Even the blonde's home was no longer considered a safe spot. The devil would not let go. And the pheromones. That was the worst part. The air quite literally reeked with them. The majority of it came from the girl as she was basically humping Naruto's leg every available second. The moment they stepped in the blonde's house, he was whisked away into his bedroom where they would remain for any time to an hour to the whole night before they would exit the room, carrying along with them a whole new wave of pheromones with them. She was doing it on purpose. Ophis knew it. She wanted to retaliate but she couldn't. Naruto wouldn't allow it. The blonde would react violently if she did. She didn't need that, at least for now. She knew that made her even angrier. She had never encountered a problem where there was no visible solution in place. Even with the Great Red, she could at least set up a plan to deal with him. This though, she had no plan. No workaround. No alternate route. All she could do was sit and endure. She never thought she could hate sitting around so much. I'm so bored. Naruto couldn't help but mumble out loud as he watched his first customer in an hour walk out of the store. It was around midday, usually one of his busiest times due to it being lunch hours, and the shop was completely empty. Not a single soul could be seen within the store excluding the ever-vigilant Ophis. Though, the debate on whether or not the god even had a soul was still up in the air. Kaneko was at school under great reluctance. It took a massive amount of pushing from both him and Rias in order to ease the girl away from his side. Ophis' presence near Naruto made it rather hard for the Nekasha to be away from him. A wistful sigh slipped out of the boy's lips as he began to remember the benefits of Kaneko's closeness. The two had literally been going at each other like rabbits for the past week. Every single free moment he had seemed to wrapped up with her. He definitely couldn't complain. He was able to experience as a whole new side of Kaneko because of it. A small smile gradually worked its onto his lips as he allowed his mind to wander. In all honesty, he had to say that he actually enjoyed days like these. They allowed him to take a step back and truly enjoy all that was around him. Even with the dragon god sitting feet away from him, most likely plotting his eventual demise, there was a sense of relaxation running through him and the store. Hey, Naruto. That relaxing feeling came to a sudden and unwanted end when the front doors to his shops slammed open. A moment later, Azazel unexpectedly came strutting into the store as if he owned the place. The man managed to take 2 steps into the store before his eyes landed on Ophis. Once his eyes landed on the god, the fallen angel froze mid-step. With one foot on the ground and the other in the air, he switched between looking at the god and at the unimpressed-looking Naruto. This game of charades lasted a full minute before the man slowly turned around and exited the store without a word. That could have been a pain in the ass. Naruto thought to himself as he watched the man turn a corner and disappear from his sight. He honestly didn't think he had the patience to deal with the man's antics today. He was relaxing, for once, and knew that with Azazel around, that state of mind would come to an abrupt end. His relaxation was once again put to a stop when the fallen angel literally came flying back into his field of view. The man looked as if he was forcibly pushed back towards the shop as he picked himself up off the ground. He shot a smoldering glare towards something out of Naruto's line of sight before turning to face the blonde's store. The man tentatively walked back up to the store before slowly pushing its front doors open. Hey there. The man's greeting was much more reserved this time around as he came into his store. His attention kept switching between the dragon and the blonde, both of which had a clearly bored look on their face. Naruto's expression bordered along the edge of agitation as the fallen angel nervously stood in front of him. What do you want, Ero Tenchi? Naruto's voice displayed his agitation much clearer than his face did. The derogatory insult was just the icing on the cake as he leveled a glare at the man. Despite all of this, Azazel showed no visible reaction. The fallen angel seemed too focused on the god present. Well, I was just wondering. You see. Azazel's attention kept switching back over to Ophis while he spoke to Naruto. It quickly became apparent to the blonde that the man felt uncomfortable in the girl's presence. It didn't exactly register why in his mind, at first, but the fact that the girl was an unfeeling dragon god soon came back to him. Sometimes, it was hard for him to remember that fact when the girl tended to act so docile around him. She acted more like an attentive child than anything. Can we have this conversation somewhere a little more private? Azazel finally spat out a full sentence. Naruto's eyes refocused on the man and saw that he was almost sweating with anxiety. The fallen angel not so subtly gestured towards Ophis with his eyes in a clear sign that he didn't want to talk with her present. Naruto rolled his eyes at the man's behavior before turning his attention onto the god. Ophis, can you put on your headphones for a bit? We're about to have a conversation and this guy talks really loud. Azazel's breath caught in his throat when the blonde addressed the god. His first reaction was to immediately berate the boy for being so casual in his speaking with the god. He was seconds away from doing so but was stopped when Ophis actually listened to Naruto. The girl actually relented by pulling out a pair of headphones and tuned out from the conversation. How in God's name did you get her to do that? The fallen angel exclaimed the exact second after Ophis put on her headphones. Naruto raised an eyebrow at the man's question before glancing over towards the dragon. I don't really know. She just listens to me. The blonde offered up a shrug. He honestly couldn't and wouldn't even begin to decipher the god's behavior. On a daily basis, he was left guessing whether she was plotting his demise or just looking in his general direction. He had learned long ago to not look too deeply into her behavior and just go with it. This didn't seem to be as easy to accept for Azazel as the man still looked flabbergasted. His attention kept switching in between the duo as if he was trying to solve some unseen puzzle. The puzzle would seemingly remained unsolved to the fallen angel as he instead decided to focus solely onto Naruto. When I first heard that Ophis was hanging around you, I was a little worried. Seems like I had nothing to worry about in the end. The man released a small chuckle after speaking. The blonde's curiosity seemed to have been spiked sometime during the man's statement as he rose slightly in his seat. Heard? Who told you that she was here? Naruto's statement earned him an incredulous look from the fallen angel. The man looked almost offended at his question. Who haven't I heard it from is a much better question. She's Ophis. She's a god. She's the dragon god. Everyone in the supernatural world got tipped off when she left the dimensional gap. The word spread like wildfire when she was sighted with you on multiple occasions. Azazel said like he was stating the obvious. And after hearing the man talk, Naruto was beginning to realize just how truthful his words were. For some odd reason, it had completely slipped his mind that Ophis hanging around him would attract so much attention. She was a reclusive god whose reputation was cemented by her introverted attitude centered around her home. Her willingly leaving her home to be with him would set off warning bells to, well, everyone. That would explain all your recent guests. Kurama spoke up. Naruto brushed off his partner's sarcastic comment, deciding to deal with it later. In all honesty, he didn't feel like he could keep a straight face in front of the fallen angel if he started arguing with the tailed beast. I knew that. The blonde mumbled out. Azazel's subsequent expression clearly said he didn't believe a single word out the blonde's mouth, but he didn't verbally refute. Sure, back on topic. The man's natural eccentric behavior seemed to come back to him. I have something really important to talk to you about. Naruto raised an eyebrow, a sign that Azazel took as a green light to begin laying out his plan to the blonde. The plan took a full 10 minutes for the fallen angel to explain. During those 10 minutes, Naruto was left seriously doubting Azazel's sanity. The man's explanation involved weird code names, an array of nearly uninterpretable body movements and even a chart that he pulled seemingly out of nowhere. By the end of it, the blonde could honestly say his head was hurting from attempting to process what he had been told. So, let me this straight. Naruto started off while rubbing his temples in a futile attempt to alleviate his headache. You want me to talk with the leader of the devils, a guy I've really only met in passing, and convince him to sit down and have a meeting with you and Michael, the leaders of his enemy factions, so that you guys can make a peace treaty? The blonde finished, clearly exasperated. Yup. Azazel responded cheerfully, clearly happy that the blonde had managed to decipher his message. The blonde released a long sigh as the man confirmed what he had feared. Yet another person was attempting to rope him into doing something he honestly wants no part of. I'm sorry, but I have to say no. If he hadn't found the man so annoying, Naruto would have felt a twinge of sympathy for the man purely based off the look on his face due to his denial. The fallen angel looked like a child whose favorite toy had just been broken before their very eyes. He looked heartbroken. What? Azazel questioned. The man spoke as if he couldn't quite believe the words that had come from out the blonde's mouth. I said I don't want to get involved in your overcomplicated tea party. Naruto shot back. But it's not complicated. All you have to do is tell. No! Naruto shouted as he shot up to his full height. It's never as easy as just talking. Peace isn't something that magically appears because of some talking. People have to unite. People have to work together. People have to trust one another for there to be peace. I've met at least one person from each of your faction and I can tell you, things won't be as easy as you're making them out to be. Trust me, I want peace too, but you all have nothing in common. Ah! Azazel exclaimed. That's where you're wrong. We do have something in common. All the factions have one common factor. And, it's you. The man let loose the revelation with a wild grin stretched across his face. If Naruto hadn't been confused before, he definitely was now due to what the fallen angel had just said. What the hell does that even mean? Naruto exclaimed. Azazel's grin only seemed to spread wider across his face, causing the blonde's heart to sink slightly. He didn't know why, but the expression on the fallen angel's face filled him with dread and annoyance. Mostly annoyance. Well, you've met and personally spoken with the leader of each faction and you've managed to tame Ophis, an integral figure in each of our faction. Plus, your status as a nature-based god lends you credibility. The man rattled off as if he was talking about something as common as the weather. If he saw the jaw drop Naruto performed at the mention of his godhood, he didn't show it. God? Nature-based god? What the hell are you talking about? Naruto exclaimed, clearly lost. What the fallen angel was spouting made no sense to him. He wasn't a god. He had never said he was a god. He never told anyone he was a god. So, why the hell did the fallen angel just call him a god? Oh, you're definitely a god. Naruto, the god of nature, the tamer of the infinite dragon god and the candy sage of Kuo, healing the earth one tree at a time. Has a nice ring to it, right? Azazel spoke with a shit-eating grin etched onto his face. His face looked seconds away from splitting as it tried in vain to contain his smile. His teeth damn near shone in the overhead light within the shop. That was how bright his smile was. This makes no sense. I'm not a god. You know I'm not a god. Naruto pointed an accusatory finger at the man. Despite the man's oddities, the blonde had trusted him enough not to make bold statements like the one he was currently making. Seems as if his trust was misplaced. Well, of course I know. Azazel casually stated, sending the teen even deeper into his rabbit hole of confusion. But everyone else doesn't. And I plan on using that to our advantage. Everyone else sees you as a new god, the starter and leader of a brand new pantheon. Your taming of Ophis has kept them off your back attack-wise, but alliance-wise is a whole different story. You're a hot commodity and a big bargaining chip. To say Naruto was shocked would be a massive understatement. His mind was still attempting to comprehend just what exactly the fallen angel was trying to get across to him. The words coming out his mouth were absolutely ludicrous. No. No 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 no. Naruto repeated the word while shaking his head. I am not getting sucked into this. I don't want any part of it. Keep me out of it. Why not, mister? I want peace too. This is the peace you're looking for. And, all you have to do to get is talk to a few people, shake a few hands, maybe gain a worshipper or two and that's it. The man read off the list as if he was reading some recipe instructions. Naruto honestly couldn't believe what the fallen angel was saying. He does have a point. This could be the way to peace that you've been looking for. Kurama spoke up from his silence. The blonde was left absolutely flabbergasted by the tailed beast's statement. Now, even his partner was backing up the craziness that was coming out of Azazel's mouth. This wasn't making sense. I can't believe this has actually happened. Naruto murmured to himself as his mind began to catch up with the reality of the situation. This wasn't some weird hallucination brought on by exhaustion or sickness. This wasn't a dream. This was actually happening. Stop being so overdramatic. The least you can do is give it a try. The tailed beast mentally spoke out. The incredulous look plastered across the blonde's face made it quite clear how he felt about that idea. But a god? A god? I can't pretend to be a god. I can barely lie. Naruto mentally exclaimed, trying his best to weasel his way out of the situation. Now that he knew that Kurama was in agreement with the idea, the blonde knew he had to convince his partner of the opposite if he enjoyed his sanity. The tailed beast would take a sick amount of pleasure of mentally torturing him with a series of guilt trips and rants. You don't have to do anything differently. According to the fallen angel, everyone already believes you to be a god. Just continue being your usual annoying self and things should go smoothly. The beast's insult went mostly under the radar as his partner attempted to analyze his words. Honestly, a large part of him wanted no part in whatever the fallen angel was planning. The man had already proved himself to be very perverted and annoying, and Naruto had a feeling that getting involved with him would only make it much worse. Come on, buddy. All you have to do is pretend a little bit and then you'll save the lives of a ton of little devil and angel children. I don't see anything wrong with that. Azazel's voice literally dripped with enough sweetness to make the blonde internally gag. Despite the over-exaggeration on the fallen angel's part, Naruto could still sense a bit of truthfulness in his words. Even if there was a small, barely infinitesimal chance that he could help bring about some variant of peace, he had to at least try, right? It couldn't be that hard. Trying wouldn't hurt, right? You know, being a god wasn't as bad as he thought it would be. It came with a lot of perks. People tended to listen to him more often than not nowadays. Though, that may be partly because Ophis was constantly by his side as a reminder of the power he had. Only a truly powerful being could tame the dragon god. Naruto rolled his eyes at the thought as he strummed his fingers against the table. If only people knew the true relationship behind him and Ophis. They would be looking at him much differently if they did. But they didn't, and them not knowing tended to make things work out much smoother, so why ruin something good? For example, actually setting up an audience with Surzex could have been a real pain in the ass if he didn't have Ophis by his side. Striding into Ria's office and demanding an audience with her brother all by himself could have ended in a much more different way. With Ophis by his side, the girl was heavy pressed to demand his request. He felt a bit bad for basically intimidating the girl into doing it, but figured he would make it up to her later. The meeting with Surzex had been interesting. Surprisingly, the man had decided to meet him at his shop. The reason for that was most likely he didn't want the chance of Ophis parading around in devil territory. Who knew what type of damage the girl could unleash if someone managed to agitate her? The devil had been actually very receptive to the idea of a sort of peace between the faction. During this meeting, Naruto managed to gauge the true character behind the goofy mask Surzex tended to wear. The man was a sincere, family-loving, peace-seeking guy who would do anything to protect his family and friends. Even if that meant slaying anything that threatened their health. But, if he could avoid murdering people, he certainly would. And this meeting would be the perfect chance to avoid it. Naruto sighed. That had been the easy part. Picking a venue for the peace talks was the hard part. Each faction refused to go into each other's territory in the fear of being ambushed or backstabbed. That level of distrust had been a somewhat disheartening sign to the blonde about how the meeting would go, but the faction's persistence on the meeting actually happening managed to keep his spirits somewhat lifted. In the end, Kuo Academy was picked as the venue. Each faction had somewhat of an influence in the city, so it only seemed fit. Naruto had petitioned for the meeting to take place within his shop, since it was going to take place within Kuo, but that idea had been quickly shot down. He was still mourning the loss of the level of sales he would have gotten. Naruto-kun. The voice carried across the room into the blonde's awaiting ears, causing him to release a groan. He turned his head towards the voice and saw an excited Azazel bounding his way towards him. A reluctant-looking Valley was right behind the man. The teen looked as if he was trying his best to look anywhere but at Naruto. Hello, my friend. Are you excited? Can you feel the buzz in the air? Today is a great day. Excitement literally seemed to be oozing from the man as he spoke. The grin stretched across his face was telltale sign of just what exactly the man was feeling. The teenager standing next to him was the exact opposite. Vala looked as if he wanted to be anywhere but here. The blonde honestly couldn't blame him. If he was forced to deal with Azazel for an extended period of time, he may have also grown into a loathsome prick. Yeah, It's weird seeing all these people together. The blonde responded as he eyed the room full of people. The room was obviously segregated. Even under the notion of a peace talk, tensions still existed among the factions. Devils stood with devils, angels stood with angels, and fallen angels stood with fallen angels. The only exception was Michael, who could be seen leaving the room with Issei in tow. This was the first sort of interfaction that the blonde had seen, making him highly curious. The leader of a faction interacting with a low-class devil was something that certainly deserved his attention. So, where's your... little buddy? Naruto's attention was brought back to a much more nervous Azazel. The man, for some odd reason, seemed to be sweating as he looked around the blonde nervously. His current attitude was a completely 180 from the one he possessed only seconds ago. It didn't take much mental effort for the shinobi to figure out what exactly had driven the fallen angel into such a mood. She's around. I thought it was best if she stayed away from the meeting, Naruto said as he eyed the man. Azazel already looked like he was ready to flee from the mere possibility that Ophis could be here. If he had shown up with the dragon unannounced, he was sure that the peace meeting would turn into an all-out brawl. Smart decision. Vala spoke up for the first time. Naruto's gaze washed over the teen as an idea struck him. By the way, I'm docking your pay. The look on Vala's face almost sent the blonde down to the ground, clutching his stomach in laughter. The devil looked absolutely flabbergasted at the revelation that his wages had been cut once again. What? You can't do that. I'll be making below minimum wage, he exclaimed. Well, maybe if you showed up for work more than once a week this type of stuff wouldn't happen, Naruto stated flippantly while inwardly holding in a laugh. The shocked silence that greeted him only made the situation that much better to the blonde. There was something very entertaining about messing with his fellow teen. I hope I'm not interrupting anything. All at once, all three males turned their head towards the new voice. Surzek-san. There he goes again. Azazel's personality did an exact 180 in the presence of the devil. The playfulness that was present only a second ago had disappeared to make room for a more respectful demeanor. It was alarming and impressive to Naruto to see the man switch between personalities so smoothly. Maybe he has multiple personalities. The blonde mused to himself as he slyly eyed the fallen angel. That would actually explain a lot. It was a much better explanation than just assuming that the man was crazy. Though, that was still as much as an option as multiple personalities. Are you ready, Naruto-san? The meeting will be starting soon. The blonde was snapped out of his thoughts by Azazel's voice. He saw that he now had the three other males' eyes on him. He instinctively gave a nod in response while trying his best to hold in his sigh. He honestly wasn't ready for the conference, but there was no point in delaying. The sooner it started, the sooner it would be over with. And, it was a peace meeting, after all. It couldn't go too bad, right? Gasper felt awkward. More awkward than usual. Being a cross-dressing devil with the ability to freeze time definitely made for some awkward situations. But being stuck in a room with Ophis and Kaneko definitely topped all of that. The boy was sat in his box, directly between the two girls. Each of them were sat at separate ends of the room. From their positions they were sending each other skin-searing glares. Even though he wasn't the target of either glare, Gasper was feeling the heat from them. It made him wanted to retreat even further inside of his box just to escape them. You guys are SCA, the boy's complaint was put to a quick stop as both girls shifted their glares onto him. Under their combined might, Gasper stood no chance. He let out a loud yelp before diving headfirst into his box. His hiding spot was a little small, however, forcing the lower half of his body, more specifically his ass, to stick upwards into the air. With the target of their glare now in hiding, the girls shifted their attention back onto each other. For once, Ophis actually had a spark of emotion on her face. The fact that that emotion was anger didn't exactly bode well for the occupants of the room. On the other hand, Kaneko's normally neutral mask was twisted into a slight smirk as she met the dragon's gaze. She didn't know why, but she couldn't help but feel a slight sense of satisfaction at the god's agitation. Knowing that she was the reason behind it made the sensation even better. And so, the silent struggle continued. Whole minutes passed without a single sound being uttered within the room. Gasper remained buried within his box, managing to avoid most of the tension within the confines of his hiding hole. A strange sense of peace settled over the room as everything remained still. That all came to a sudden halt when the lights in the room unexpectedly switched off. Gasper let out a light gasp as he rose his head from the inside of his box while both girls settled for simply blinking. What is going on? Gasper stuttered as he nervously looked around his room, his red eyes almost seeming to shine in the dark room. Kaneko stood from her seat and began to walk over towards the boy as her ears began to pick up noises come from outside the room's entrance. Ophis remained silently sitting as she observed the duo. A second later, the door to the room exploded in a shower of splinters, forcing both Kaneko and Gasper to take cover. Before the duo could even react, two streams of light shot into the room and struck them. Within an instant, the duo found themselves pinned against the opposite wall as a series of seals covering their limbs. Once the two devils were incapacitated, several cloaked figures entered the room. The figures were obviously all female. The very deep cleavage-revealing cloaks they wore made that clear. They wore a hood that covered the majority of their faces and had the design of 3 golden eyes running down it. The women almost seemed to glide into the room as they entered one by one, bringing with them a small light source as they approached the restrained devils. Gasper Vladi. One of the females spoke as she stood in front of the young devil. The damper released a small whimper when the woman reached out her hand and began to trace his cheek. Kaneko was glaring holes into the woman as she touched her fellow peerage member. We have come for you. The woman spoke again as she let her arm fall back to her side. She took a step away from the devil before aligning in a circle with the rest of the group. Once the circle was formed, the group of females joined hands as they began to utter a strange chant. Excuse me. Gasper weakly muttered moments into the chant. The devil's words went completely ignored as the cloaked group continued their chant, their voices growing louder and louder with each passing second. A strange glow began to form around the circle as their voices picked up. Excuse me. Gasper spoke even louder this time. His voice earned him a slight moment of hesitation from the group but didn't halt them in their action as they continued to chant. The light that was forming around them took the form of a halo as its brightness filled the room. Gasper and Valley were both forced to turn their heads in order to shield their eyes from the light. Excuse me. Gasper yelled at the top of his lungs. What do you want, child? The closest female yelled right back at him. The damper gestured with his eyes and head to the opposite side of the room. The cloaked figure hesitated for a moment before following the boy's pointed look. With the halo of light hanging above their heads, the group of females could now clearly see the full contents of the room. The light provided from the halo shone bright in the room, revealing Ophis now standing form. The god was sending an indignant glare at the group. Oh Ophis-sama. The woman stuttered out in unison under the dragon's glare. This was not supposed to happen. Ophis wasn't supposed to be anywhere near this meeting. Chow Chow had ensured them of that. This wasn't good. Not at all. Uzumaki won't like this. Ophis said as his eyes swept over the two devils. Her gaze lingered on Kaneko for the longest before returning to the group of females. You all made a mistake. The woman's pleas went silent as she faded out of existence. There was no warning, no clue, no foreshadowing. One moment she was there and the next she simply wasn't. The woman around her jumped back in shock as they watched her empty cloak flutter to the ground without her in it. Their eyes remained on the piece of fabric for several seconds before reluctantly moving back towards the dragon god. In the time they had taken their eyes off of her, a large black snake had manifested herself and had coiled itself around the girl's body. I shall end you all for him. The meeting was going well. Surprisingly well. Naruto had expected there to be much more tension between the groups, but they had all proven him wrong. The conversation had been civilized, much more than the Kage summit that took place within his home world, though, to give his world credit, the circumstances were much more intense. At that point, Akatsuki had been methodically picking off Jinchuriki one by one. A superpower coalition of S-rank, land-altering ninja still capturing the largest threats to the shinobi world still wasn't enough to completely sway each of the Kage immediately. Only after revealing Madara Uchiha's name did the villages collectively decide to team up. And even then, if it wasn't for Sasuke's interference, that may have never happened. Stupid stubborn old people. Naruto thought to himself as his eyes scanned the room. Despite his thoughts and the fact that the people in the room was exponentially older than the Kage, things couldn't have been going better. Michael made for an excellent mediator despite any bias the man might have. The man's voice sounded as if it was woven with a genjutsu as it flowed out of his lips. It gave the room a sense of serenity that made the discussions go much smoother. And with this comes the free exchange of information. Michael's voice faded in and out of focus to the blonde as he observed the occupants of the room. In all honesty, he wasn't very interested in the exact logistics of the alliance. It was all too technical for him. And this was only a meeting. He could only imagine what terror would occur when they actually sat down to make a proper draft. Naruto's attention was snatched up when he felt his chair shift a little beneath him. His eyes flashed to his right where he was greeted to the sight of an uninterested Shemhazai staring up at Michael. The fallen angel looked beyond bored as he tried to keep his attention focused on his brother. Because of this, Naruto crossed him off the suspect as he turned to his right to face his next culprit. It didn't even take a second for the blonde to deduce that the person to his right was the culprit. The massive grin on her face was a dead giveaway, but the fact that she was also staring directly at him was a pretty big hint as well. "Hi there." The girl sounded as if she was trying to whisper, but it instead came out as a hushed shout. Her exclamation earned her the agitated glare of several people around her, causing her to turn towards them to offer them a sheepish apology. While she was occupied with her apologies, Naruto took some time to observe her. The most notable thing about the girl was what she was wearing. The girl was dressed in something you would see in a children's TV show. The pink clothing, extremely short skirt and thigh-high socks gave her a very childlike vibe. The blonde could even see a wand tucked away in the waistband of her skirt. That was all he got to examine before the girl swung back towards him with her grin back in place. "Sorry about that was all the strange girl got to say before the peace conference came to a grinding stop. All at once, every person within the room went deathly shallow. Some looked pale, some looked afraid and some had actually fainted. The general mood of the room did a complete 180 within a single moment. And it was all because of the wave of monstrous energy that washed over them all. Of all days. It didn't take much for the blonde to deduce who was the source of the energy wave. The same could be said for the other occupants of the room as they all began to look over towards them. Their sudden attention on him confused the blonde for a single moment before he remembered the nickname the supernatural community had decided to bestow upon him. Ophis Tamer. If only they knew how ironically messed up that statement was. The blonde would have given them all a roll of his eyes if he hadn't disappeared in a golden flash moments before. In the brief moment it took Naruto to run from the meeting room to the room where he knew Ophis and Kaneko, the blonde prepared himself for a lot of things. While he didn't completely trust the god, he had enough faith within her to leave her alone with his girlfriend for the duration of the conference. His mind raced with possibilities of what could have possibly made Ophis display some of her powers. It was because of this paranoia that Naruto managed to push himself to cross the distance of the entirety of the campus in less than a second. When the blonde arrived at the room, he was relieved to see that Kaneko was alright, albeit pinned against the wall by some strange seal. Right beside her was a feminine figure that the team could only guess was Gasper, Kaneko's best friend and Kuoa's resident damper. What he was surprised to see was the state Ophis was in. The god didn't look agitated or upset or even tired. She looked as calm and placated as ever as she stood in the center of her room, her back facing the restrained Kaneko and several mysterious cloaks that were on the floor. "I took care of your issue," was Ophis' greeting to the blonde. Briefly ignoring the girl's words, Naruto did a quick scan of the room to try and piece together what exactly had went on in the room. When his mind failed to come up with a possible scenario, his eyes instinctively went over to Kaneko to see if she was okay. Ophis seemed to notice his gaze as she turned her head to look at the Nekashu. The god then proceeded to give a small tilt of her head in the devil's direction. The next instant, the sound of glass shattering filled the air as the seals restraining both Kaneko and Gasper shattered. Kaneko managed to land lightly on her feet while her partner was much more unfortunate as he landed flat on his face. The blonde was interrupted once again as a bright light filled the room, provided by its only window. All occupants of the room turned their head towards the window and saw a massive seal filling the entirety of the sky over Ko. Out of the seal came spewing hundreds of women dressed in cloaks similar to the ones laying on the ground. Their intentions remained hidden for only a brief second before they began to rain down hell upon the school, shaking it to its foundation. "What the hell is going on?" Naruto questioned as the women continued their attack. Unknowing to the blonde, Ophis was having similar thoughts as she examined the marks on the women's clothing. She had been slightly suspicious when the group had tried attacking the half-vampire and the person she had dubbed Uzumaki's leech. Now though, with the mass appearance of the women and the massive seal in the sky, she had a clear picture of what exactly was going on. "Uzumaki, I'm going outside." That was Naruto's only warning before the god threw herself at the window. She went crashing through it and into the open air as she flew towards the seal in the sky, leaving a dumbfounded Naruto alone in the room with his girlfriend and Gasper. "Naruto-kun." The blonde's attention was once again stolen, this time by his girlfriend. He turned to face the girl only to have her appear in his face seconds before she wrapped him in a massive hug. The male could almost feel his bones begin to creak beneath the pressure the young girl was putting out as she remained wrapped onto him. The hug lasted for several seconds before Kaneko reluctantly pulled away. "Go. I'll stay here and protect Gasper. You go help." The devil left no room for argument as she stared into her boyfriend's eyes. The blonde hesitated only for a second before nodding in return. Despite how much he wanted to stay to ensure nothing would happen to Kaneko, he knew he couldn't do so with Ophis out there. He had never seen the gods so assertive before, so he knew that whatever had managed to get the god like that was serious enough for him to get involved. So, with that in mind, the blonde quickly summoned 4 clones within the room before disappearing out of the Ophis-made hole in the window, leaving Gasper and Kaneko alone with the clones. "That, he was your boyfriend?" Gasper questioned as he eyed one of the clones. Kaneko offered her friend a slight nod as she watched Naruto bound his way towards the campus courtyard. "Wow, he really is as cute as you said." A quick glare from Kaneko told Gasper that he had crossed a line. So he did the smart thing and shut his mouth. Still, that didn't mean what he said wasn't true. She was beginning to realize just how irritating humans could be. Naruto had briefly introduced her to that concept, but the magicians present had cemented that fact in her head. Humans were annoying. They were a pest, a thorn in her side that served as a constant agitation. She didn't like pests. The magicians pouring out of the seal belonged to the hero faction, a faction within the Chaos Brigade. The women manifesting out of the seal were the symbol of the Magicians' Council, only confirming Ophis' line of thought. She hadn't ordered any sort of attack. And, only one person within her organization had the authority to command the magicians. Chow Chow. Ophis wasn't too surprised at the revelation. She had always suspicious of the man. She knew he didn't have enough power to even begin to challenge her, but his intentions for joining the group had never been clear. This attack being spurred on by the magicians only helped her to realize just how untrustworthy he truly was. And because of that, he would be dealt with. But first, the magicians. She could already see the devils, angels and fallen angels pouring out of the school building, most likely to confront the magician invasion. She wasn't worried by their presence. By the time they prepared any sort of counterattack, she would have dealt with the invasion first. That was something to be sure of. The first magician that fell victim to the god's agitation didn't even get to experience her death. By the time she realized what was happening, she was already waist-deep within a snake that Ophis had formed from her body. The ethereal creature devoured the women in a single gulp before immediately heading towards the nearest magician, its innards immediately disintegrating the body of the women it ate. With her snake set loose on its own personal war path, Ophis turned her attention on to the seal. By this point, most of the magicians were still ignorant to her presence. The 3 factions and their leaders seemed to pick up on it as they quickly slowed in their advancement. It was probably for the best as Ophis made her next move. There was no warning. No flashing lights or bells or whistles were there to warn the magicians what exactly they had walked into. 1 second, Ophis was floating in the air several hundred yards away from them. In the next second, the god was still there, but instead of her human form, the girl had opted for her dragon form. Each and every magician's attention was captured by the towering dragon that had suddenly materialized next to them. With the dragon's appearance came the oppressive presence as an almost unbearable pressure settled upon the shoulders of everyone present. The god was letting her energy leak out of her in spades in order to paralyze her prey. She didn't want any of them to escape. A swipe of her arm. That was all it took to end the lives of dozens of the magicians. Her dragon body responded to her movements, moving its arm in perfect tandem with her while snatching up magicians in the process. The women that didn't die due to first contact with the god's energy soon found themselves crushed against the dragon's arm and the ground. The women that had managed to stay out of range of Ophis' first attack quickly came to the realization of what was happening. And with that realization in mind, it didn't take them long to rationalize a plan to retreat. Unfortunately for them, they had already signed their lives away. A retreat was no longer an option. Death was the only thing that would greet them. Before any of the humans could make a move, Ophis raised her draconian head into the sky and released a roar. The women closest to her released shrill screams as the sheer volume of the roar left them clutching their heads in pain. Blood soon began to leak from their ears as the humongous level of decibels shattered the inner workings of their ears. This mattered not, as the god's roar had a secondary effect. The energy contained within the sound wave was strong enough to completely shatter the magician's seal, cutting off any more from entering and keeping the rest trapped within Ko. This earth-shattering realization came upon the remainder of the magicians all too quickly as their organized retreat turned into a free-for-all. But it was too late. Their escape route had been cut off, and now they were truly at the mercy of the god. Wordlessly, thousands of snakes stretched out from the god's body. The hideous creatures hissed in unison, filling the air with a horrendously dreadful sound before descending upon their prey. The scene was brutal, especially to the group of supernatural creatures standing on the sidelines bearing full witness to it. Most of the younger generation shielded their eyes in order to avoid watching the snakes feast upon the fleeing magicians. Even though they managed to shield their sight, they couldn't block out the sound of death and hissing that filled the air. The older generation stared solemnly forward. They had grown used to seeing this type of carnage during the war. They held no sympathy for the enemy force. Michael and his comrades were the only ones among them that dared to show any sort of remorse for the death of the magicians. The slaughter lasted only the briefest of minutes. Ophis was terribly efficient at killing, it seemed. Nothing was left remaining after her rampage as she turned to face the group, causing them all to collectively tense up. After watching the god take down a legion of magicians, human or not, anyone that could kill that many people that quickly should be feared. And not a single one of them wished to go up against that type of fighting force. Luckily for them, it would not come to that. Before any moves could be made by the god, Naruto dropped down in front of the group, putting himself in between them and the dragon. Ophis met eyes with the blonde as a silent conversation began between the two. The three factions waited with bated breath as god and god stared into each other's eyes. The silence was tense as the weight of a possible attack from the dragon hung over all their heads. It never came down to that. Somehow, without the exchange of a single word, Naruto managed to calm the dragon. In a fluid motion, the energy that made up Ophis' dragon construct retracted back inside her body, leaving her floating freely in the air. The girl slowly descended back down towards the ground before making her way towards the blonde. The duo shared another brief conversation with each other that went unheard by the group. The conversation ended with Ophis sending a brief glance towards the faction's leaders before returning her attention to Naruto. The girl offered the teen a small nod before disappearing from all of their sights. Naruto sighed as Ophis disappeared from his sight. The dragon had supposedly returned to HSR dimension to deal with some issues. He could only assume that it had something to do with the invasion force. He could actually sense a large amount of agitation within her during their brief conversation. He felt bad for whatever poor bastard managed to frustrate her. Naruto, my boy. The blonde felt his own agitation grow at the sound of a familiar voice. He had to hold in yet another sigh when he felt someone land next to his side. Before he could utter a single word, he found himself wrapped in a one-armed hug by a certain fallen angel. What an amazing display! Absolutely fantastic! This is exactly what we needed. The fallen angel was absolutely exuberant as he clung onto Naruto. The smile on his face could actually be felt by the blonde as he smashed his fist against the blonde's. What the hell are you talking about? I didn't even do anything. Naruto grunted out as he tried to detach himself from the man. He found the task to be much easier said than done as Azazel kept a vice-like grip on him. It took a full 10 seconds of struggling before he was finally able to free himself. He turned to face the man, only to have to hide his eyes from how bright his smile was. Didn't do anything? Oh boy, oh, you have absolutely no idea. Azazel stated as she swung his arm over the blonde's shoulders. Before the teen could wiggle his way out of the one-armed hug, the Grigori leader spun the teen around so that he was facing the rest of the group. Ladies and gentlemen, there we have it. The illustrious nature-wielding, dragon god-taming, candy-selling god in action. What a show! The man exclaimed while throwing his free arm high into the air. Silence permeated the air after the man's statement, causing Naruto to twitch due to the awkwardness of the situation. The gaze of over 20 supernatural creatures, some being the leaders of their factions while others having enough strength and authority to rival the Kages of his world, was something he didn't particularly enjoy nor wanted. He felt scrutinized underneath the gaze. It was as if they were attempting to peel away the very layers of his character in order to see his true nature. It felt weird. And honestly, a bit creepy too. That feeling slowly went away as a single clap broke through the silence. Everyone turned their head towards the noise to see Michael clapping his hands. The angel stood at the forefront of their little group and had his eyes focused directly onto Naruto. The two blondes met eyes as a sense of understanding seemed to overcome them both. The angel offered his fellow blonde small nod just seconds before the remainder of the group erupted into a fit of clapping. The blonde mentally filed away the angel's gesture for later as Azazel began to push him towards the group. That small nod meant a lot to him. It was good to know he would no longer be on the leaders of heaven bad side. What an amazing display. I've never seen something like that before. That kicked so much ass. Absolutely outstanding. Naruto felt a blush attempting to work its own way onto his cheeks as the group bombarded with compliment after compliment. Even after all his time in both his world and this one, he still hadn't grown used to being complimented. He had his stunted childhood to thank for that one. If we're finished with this senseless chatter. Barakiel spoke up over the multitude of voices, silencing them all instantly. The fallen angel's eyes swept over the entirety of the group before eventually stopping on Naruto. I believe we have yet to finish our talk. I advise we do it quickly so that we may properly deal with the damage that occurred. His words seemed to snap the group back into focus as they realized the truth in his words. Collectively they began to make their way back into the slightly damaged building, sweeping Naruto up with them in the tide of people. Just before the blonde could get swept into the building by the crowd, he spotted two people making their way away from the crowd. It only took his mind a second to recognize the leading girl as Akino and the redhead following her was Rias. His mind immediately flashed back to Asia and the girl's desperate plea for him to help her help Akino. It didn't take much debating for the blonde to quickly summon and replace himself with one of his clones. His senses of chivalry and the immense boredom he felt sitting in on the peace talks were plenty of motivation to ditch the things. So he deftly made his way towards the fleeing girls, leaving his clone at the mercy of the supernatural horde and the mind-numbing boredom that the meeting would surely bring. Akino, please wait. Rias pleaded as she followed after her queen. The black-haired was charging away from the girl at a rapid pace. She wasn't listening to a single word from Rias as she kept her pace up. The red-headed devil seemed to realize this as she picked up her own pace to catch up. Akino. Please just list. Rias managed to catch up to her queen and reached out to touch the girl. Akino swung around and swiped at the girl's outstretched hand, smacking it aside. The heiress stood dumbfounded for several seconds as she took notice of Akino's expression. Tears were spilling down the girl's cheeks as she futilely attempted to stop them from leaving her eyes. Rias' expression softened at the sight of her friend's face. Akino. The girl's voice was much softer as she approached her queen again. This time, Akino didn't attempt to run. The girl stood stock still with her arms down by her side and her head facing the ground as the redhead stood close to her. The girl gave no visible reaction when Rias slowly reached out her arms to envelope the girl in a hug. But, ever so slowly, the girl's emotions began to leak out from beneath her emotionless mask. Her shoulders began to shake erratically as several sobs escaped her. The sobs turned into a full-blown cry as she finally let go. He stood there, he said nothing, he didn't even acknowledge me. My mom died because of him and he couldn't even look me in the eye. Akino spilled her heart out in between her panicked sobs. Rias was at a loss for words as her queen spoke. All she could do was hold on tighter while the sadist continued to cry. It's going to be okay. Rias said softly in an attempt to placate her friend. That seemed to be the wrong thing to say as it got the exact opposite reaction out of the girl. Akino pushed herself away from the redhead as her tears continued their steady trail down her cheeks. No. It's not going to be okay. It's never going to be okay. You don't understand. His blood, my mom's murder's blood, is in me. That will never change. I'm dirty because of him. I'm tainted. The girl's voice dropped down to an almost silent whisper at the end of the tirade. Rias truly was at a loss for words now. The redhead was stunned. She had never heard the girl so upset before. It left her confused. Even through her confusion, Rias still wanted to help her friend. She took 2 hesitant steps towards Aquino in order to engage the distraught girl once again. Her queen was having none of this, however, as the girl quickly summoned her wings in response. Before Rias could say anything, Aquino took off into the sky. By the time the redhead could even think to follow her, the girl was far out of her line of sight. Aquino! Rias whispered as she stared wistfully into the sky. So focused was she on her friend that she didn't even notice a flash of gold that ignited seconds after the girl flew away. She was alone. The forest gave her that. Away from him, away from Rias, away from people. It didn't feel nearly as satisfying as she wished it to be. She felt more empty than ever. But, at least she didn't have to deal with people anymore. She knew was wrong. She would eventually have to return. Whether he would still be there or not wouldn't matter. Her anger and frustration wouldn't just disappear. She couldn't continue her facade anymore. She couldn't pretend to be happy with who she was. Not anymore. Not with his blood inside of her. Aquino sighed as she ran a hand over her wings. They were tainted just like the rest of her. Anger rushed through her system as removed her hand from her wings. A spear made up of her demonic energy manifested within her grip seconds. The devil stared angrily down at her wings with her spear in hand. She knew what she was about to do was wrong, but she needed it. She needed to be free of him some way. Even if it was only for a few hours before her regeneration kicked in, she would at least be free for those few hours. It was with these thoughts in mind that Aquino raised her spear high into the air and brought it down with full intentions on cleaving off her wings. Whoa there! That plan came to a sudden halt when Aquino's spear was deftly plucked out of her hands. The girl swung around only to come face to face with the blonde-haired boy that had managed to tame the dragon god. "I'm sorry, but I can't let you do that," Naruto said as he clenched down on the shaft of the spear, shattering it into pieces. Aquino watched in shock as the remnants of her spear fall to the ground. It took several seconds for her mind to catch up to what had just happened, but when it did, she grew angry. "What do you think you're doing?" Aquino yelled as she allowed her wings to unfurl fully behind her. Naruto looked completely unaffected by the display. The girl only got a single raised eyebrow in response. "It looked like I was stopping you from killing yourself." Naruto's words left the devil slightly dumbfounded. Killing herself? She could never do something like that. She had too much to live for. Too much she wanted to do with her life. She couldn't end it early. "I wasn't going to kill myself. I was just going to." She froze. What was she going to do? Hurt herself? Tear off her wings just so she could experience some sense of fictional freedom from her father? Was that honestly any better than killing herself? Naruto watched as the girl froze, slightly confused about her reaction. That confusion quickly turned into panic when he saw tears begin to form in her eyes. Crying girls definitely were not the blonde's specialty. He didn't know if he could handle one, especially after seeing what had happened minutes prior. "Whoa! Please don't cry. Please, please, please don't cry." Naruto grew frantic as he approached the girl. Before he could get close to her, her wings blasted him backwards, landing him flat on her ass. "Don't come close to me. Don't touch me. You don't know what I am." The last part was said in a whisper, but Naruto managed to still hear it as he climbed back up to his feet. "Well, whatever you are, it can't be bad enough to stop me from stopping you from killing yourself," the blonde reasoned. After spending time with Ophis, he couldn't imagine the girl in front of her being much worse. Ophis was indifferent to the point where life had no value to her. Despite her general cuteness, the girl was homicidal through and through. "Don't you say that!" Aquino screamed in response. Obviously, he hadn't said the most appropriate thing. "You don't know what I am or what's inside of me. I would be doing the world a favor if I..." She trailed off once again as all her anger faded from her. She felt hollow, yet again, at the thought of what she had been about to do. Naruto saw the girl freeze up once again. He was slowly beginning to piece together what exactly was affecting the girl. From what he heard from Rias and Aquino's conversation and what the girl had just told him, a picture was beginning to form. And the picture looked very similar to one he had faced before. "You know, I don't have to know you or know what's inside of you to know if you're a good person or not," came Naruto's dry response. Before Akino could shout out her reply, Naruto appeared in her face, startling her into silence. It's unbearable, isn't it? Naruto started again, catching the girl even further off guard. She found herself lost as she stared at the blonde. His face had taken on a sort of whimsical expression as he looked down at her. The pain being alone, the pain of being different, the pain of having something forced inside you that you never wanted, that you hated. At this, Naruto lifted the bottom of his shirt, revealing his stomach to the girl. Akino's eyes immediately gravitated to the bright glowing symbol covering the blonde's abs. I know that feeling. Naruto continued. I've been there. To be honest, I'm no god. I'm not anything special. I'm just a human. A human cursed since I was a kid with something I never wanted in the first place. Some called it a demon. Some called me a demon. I believed it for a while too. Things can seem real dark and lonely when you have to live with a part of yourself that you hate. Naruto dropped his shirt as he broke eye contact with the girl. The point I'm trying to make is there's some things about yourself you can't change. You're born with them and stuck with them all your life. So you have to learn to accept them. When you learn to do that, the people around you will learn to do the same. They'll rescue you from loneliness. They'll save you from yourself. They will be your friends. Naruto finished as he turned his attention back to Akino. The girl had been silent for the length of his talk, leaving him somewhat ignorant to her feeling. The blank look she had on her face after he finished speaking certainly didn't give him much insight either. As the silence between the two continued on, Naruto began to think just how odd what he said sounded. Look, I know I'm not the best at explaining things. I was trying to Naruto was silenced when Akino slammed chest first into him. This time, the blonde didn't hesitate as he instinctively wrapped his arms around the girl. It's so hard. Naruto heard Akino whisper into his chest. A soft sigh left his lips as he began to rub the girl's back. He could remember similar nights being spent with Irika once it was revealed to him that he contained Kurama. Knowing the reason why everyone disliked him and knowing that he couldn't change it made life even more difficult at times. It left him, confused, angry and hating himself constantly as a kid. It was only with the help of his friends that he manages to truly accept himself as a person. I know it is. Naruto spoke out as he tightened his hold on Akino. That's why your friends are here to help you. That's why I'm here to help you. The girl gave him a tight squeeze. Without a single word, the girl had said a lot with that squeeze. It showed she was willing to try. She wasn't going to give up. She couldn't give up. For herself and for her friends. Naruto couldn't help but smile as he held the embrace. Even though she didn't say, he knew he had helped Akino, if only by a little. That's something an almighty god couldn't accomplish. Some things needed a more gentle touch. Sometimes, people just need a friend. Chapter 24. The sun was particularly bright this morning, he noted. The heat radiating through the air was a testament to its brightness as he had long since discarded his shirt to avoid it getting drenched in sweat. It wouldn't do him much good to get sweaty so early in the morning. Naruto was taking part in his daily ritual in a new section of the forest. A couple of days ago, he had finally wizened up and started to use clones to help in his purification process. With their help, he managed to get a lot more done in a very short amount of time. He managed to get so much done that he was actually starting to plan sending his clone out of the city and into the surrounding area, and eventually into other countries. Even with the clones, covering the whole world will take a while. Naruto sighed to himself as he broke his meditation. He always seemed to pick the hard goals that took forever to do. Though, he didn't really have anyone but himself to blame. What am I thinking? Naruto suddenly yelled out, disturbing the ring of animals that had settled around him while he was purifying the area. The animals gave him a quizzical look as he stood up to his feet with a wide grin stretched across his face. No task is too big for Naruto Uzumaki and his gang of clones. He exclaimed before two clones popped into existence beside him. The three Narutos began to shake hands with one another and dance merrily, earning them each strange looks from all the animals. Seeing that their peace radiator was now gone, the animals began to slowly disperse throughout the forest. After only a minute, a single animal was the only thing remaining with the blondes. That animal's presence became known to the blonde when it came sprinting from the edge of the forest. At the sound of the creature's yipping, Naruto turned his head towards it. His eyes immediately soaked in the sight of the tiny, evergreen fox that was sprinting towards him. His clones didn't get to experience his surprise as they dispelled seconds before the fox landed at the blonde's feet. "Where did you come from?" Naruto asked out loud as he kneeled down to inspect the animal. The little kit didn't make the task easy for him as it immediately hopped onto his outstretched arm and ran up it. The blonde merely raised an eyebrow at the animal's behavior as it ran up the length of his body and planted itself firmly onto his shoulder. "Well, you aren't shy." The blonde rose back up to his full height as he glanced over at the kit. The little thing met his gaze and gave a curiosity-filled look in return. In all honesty, if Naruto couldn't feel a not-so-hidden well of energy contained in the fox, he would have found the moment to be unbelievably adorable. "You do know that animal isn't normal?" Kurama questioned as Naruto kept his attention on the kit. The blonde let out a thoughtful hum as he absent-mindedly lifted his hand and began to gently rub the fox's head. The animal showed no sign of reluctance as it immediately began to shove his head into Naruto's hand. "I figured that out when it hopped on my shoulder. Foxes aren't really supposed to have supernatural energy." The blonde ran his eyes over the creature. The thing was no bigger than his head, yet he could feel a power source that was equivalent to a devil radiating from it. Its white and yellow color scheme also made it pretty unlikely that the creature was native to Kuo. "You're just going to let it come with you?" Kurama questioned when his partner began to walk out of the clearing. Naruto gave a shrug at the kitsune's question, earning him a displeased look from the fox on his shoulder as the movement jostled it slightly. "Why not? It's not like it can do much harm." Kurama huffed at his partner's response. The boy's lackadaisical attitude was going to get them both killed eventually. It was only a matter of time. "Naruto. Why do you have a fox on your shoulder?" "Because I found it in the forest." Kaneko loved her boyfriend. She really did. But, things like this made her question the boy's thought processes and sanity. What sane person would pick up a random animal in the middle of the forest and bring it back to their cooking shop? Only Naruto would. "I think it's rather cute, Kaneko-chan. It fits him." Kaneko's eyes drifted over to her sole companion at the counter. Akino looked as happy as could be as she sipped leisurely at a cup of tea that had been prepared for her by Naruto. After the debacle that had occurred at the school, the blonde and the sadist had grown exponentially closer. This had immediately sent off warning bells inside Kaneko's head, especially after hearing they spent time alone beforehand. It didn't help that her boyfriend had been rather sparse in his detailing of the events that led to his sudden closeness with the devil/fallen angel. It took the combined efforts of Naruto and Akino to ease away the girl's thoughts. Ever since then, if Akino wasn't with Rias or Issei, she could be found at Naruto's shop. The two clicked in a way that almost seemed like magic. The two didn't talk much, Akino being more than happy to just sit back and watch the interaction between the two lovers, but when they did, the conversation would surely be filled with laughter and happiness. "Thank you for the continued support, Akino-chan," Naruto said in reply, earning him a large smile from the devil. Kaneko rolled her eyes at her boyfriend's behavior before returning her attention to her plate of cookies. No matter what her thoughts on Akino were, having the girl here was a million times better than Office. The Nekasha couldn't have possibly been any happier to have the god out of her hair. "She only supports you because you make her food," Kaneko mumbled as she munched on a cookie. The blonde scoffed at the girl's words before subtly glancing towards Akino for confirmation. The devil was avidly avoiding eye contact with him while sipping from her cup, confirming the Nekasha's words and Naruto's fear. "How could you, Akino-chan?" The blonde whined out loudly, catching the attention of some of his customers, before dramatically slamming his head onto counter. His head bang sent a cloud of flour up into the air as his forehead thudded loudly into a pile of dough. The male's dramatic antics earned him 2 poignant glares from his companions. "So dramatic," Kaneko mumbled to herself as a small smile creeped its way onto her face. Despite her words, she couldn't help feel happy at her boyfriend's actions. It was just one of the few things she loved about him. The sweet moment came crashing to a stop when the doors to the shop slammed open. Everyone in the store, including the fox perched on the blondes, turned to face the entryway. Their eyes were met with the hulking form of a man as he seemed to stumble into the shop. Behind him trailed 2 individuals. The sight of one of them made Akino tense up immediately. Both Naruto and Akino picked up on this and moved to comfort the girl before she could react rashly. The sadistic devil felt a pair of hands land softly against her shoulder and thigh respectively. She tore her gaze away from the individual in order to send her friends a grateful look. "EY Blondie." Naruto briefly looked away from Akino to gaze at the man who had just stumbled into his shop and was now yelling at him. To say the man looked unique would be quite the understatement. Everything from his clothing to his hair screamed abnormal. Most of his body was concealed by a large, sweeping blue cloak. He had on a strangely large hat that seemed to be adorned with a variety of precious gems. His left eye was covered by an eye patch and he had a wrapped package dangled along his backside. Though, his appearance wasn't the real thing that caught Naruto's attention. The power rolling off of the old man sent shivers down the blonde's spine. It was overwhelming, yet so contained. It was a feeling he had only felt once, in Opha's presence, and the fact that the old man was giving off that feeling meant no good for him. Then him. The blonde's focus switched over to the male companion of the old man. Unlike the other two, Naruto was actually familiar with this one. After all, Barrakiel had been present at the peace meetings only weeks prior. Plus, he had heard plenty about the fallen angel from his distraught daughter. The man looked exactly how he looked weeks ago. His face seemed to be set in a permanent scowl as his eyes remained set onto him. You deaf or something, kiddo? Naruto's attention was forced back onto the old man when he got directly up to his face. The blonde scrunched his nose at the scent of the men's breath. It stunk of alcohol and meat. The harsh scent grated against his nerves, causing the boy to physically move his head away from the man. I'm not deaf, sir. What do you want? Naruto questioned, attempting to keep up the act of the amicable shop owner despite the man's shitty behavior. The old man seemed to sense his intentions as a sneer quickly crossed his face before he heavily plopped himself at one of the counter stools. I said give me the hardest alcohol you got back there. The man half slurred, half shouted at the blonde. By this point, everyone in the shop had their eyes on the interaction. Naruto could feel the roaring flames of agitation building within him at the drunkard's behavior. A shared look with Kaneko was the only thing that stopped the teen from losing his composure. We don't serve alcohol here. Naruto's response earned him a sneer from the man. A stream of incomprehensible speech left his mouth before he turned to face his female companion. Can you believe this guy? They don't serve alcohol. His voice was mocking as he spoke to the girl. With his back turned, he couldn't see the agitation finally break through the facade Naruto had erected. Not even the calming touch of his girlfriend was enough to calm him now. What type of rinky-dink, shithole doesn't serve alcohol? What a tra, that was as far as the man got before he found the collar of his shirt seized in Naruto's grip. Before he could even move to react, the blonde jerked his arm down violently, sending the man's head slamming against the counter. Listen here, you drunk piece of shit. You insult my shop one more time and I'll shove my foot so far up your ass that you'll be tasting my sandals. Now get the hell out of my shop. With each word of the final sentence, Naruto moved. At the final word, he lifted the man from his stool before sending him flying through the air. With an embarrassingly high-pitched scream, the man crashed through the front doors of the shop and onto the sidewalk outside. Everyone in the shop was silent as the blonde released a huff before casually returning to his treat-making. Such an idiot. Barrakiel muttered to himself as he watched his charge go sailing out of the chart. He supposed he should have cared, but having to deal with the man's antics for the day had left him less than empathetic. The fallen angel moved his attention over to Naruto, sweeping over Akino with his eyes in the process. The blonde could be heard muttering obscenities beneath his breath as he aggressively rolled out a piece of dough. A small sigh slipped past his lips as he approached the counter. Naruto-san, I Apollo. The man was put to a rather quick silence when the blonde shot his palm upwards. The fallen angel found himself staring at the center of the teen's palm as Naruto continued his diligent rolling, now with only one hand. His confusion kept him silent for a few long seconds before he attempted to speak again. Is there an... Shush! The fallen angel general blinked owlishly at the rude gesture. This wasn't how he had expected this interaction to go. He hadn't even been aware he was going to talk during all of this, and now he was being hushed by some teenager. Despite his usual calmness and apathy, Barrakiel felt the tiniest amount of irritation well up within him. Excuse me. Do not talk to me until you've talked to her. Barrakiel once again found himself silenced by the boy at the sound of his words. The fallen angel didn't even have to look to know who the blonde was talking about. Even now from the corner of his eye, he could see the eager and hopeful look on his daughter's face. The man began as he turned to face Akino. The shop fell deathly silent as the father and daughter met eyes. The words that seemed ready to leap from Barakiel's throat became stuck. His mouth remained agape as he saw his own reflection shining back at him in the teary eyes of his daughter. A choked gasp threatened to break the men's silence as for the briefest of seconds, the image of Shuri Himejima overlapped the form of her daughter. The similarities between the two were astonishing, and the fallen angel couldn't help but become mesmerized as he tried to observe them all. But, before he could, the vision flashed away, leaving him staring back into Akino's eyes. I apologize. Barakiel's words were rushed as he spoke. He didn't bother to wait for any sort of reply as he quickly turned on his heels and rushed out the door. He passed the stumbling form of the rude man that Naruto had thrown out on his way out. His departure left the store silent, even as the old man limped his way back up to the counter. It's so hard to get good help nowadays. What type of guard just leaves their client like that? The man grumbled as he sat himself back down at the counter. His words went completely ignored as Naruto and Kaneko focused the entirety of their attention on Akino. He apologized. Akino mumbled softly as she stared at the spot where her father once stood. Kaneko swiftly made her over to her friend and placed a comforting hand on her thigh. Her action did not go unnoticed as Akino offered up a soft smile in return. Are you okay, Akino-chan? The girl's attention was brought away to the nekashu. Akino nodded at her fellow devil before climbing off of the counter's stool. I'm fine, Kaneko. I'm actually better than fine. She commented mysteriously before beginning to sway her way towards the door. Kaneko and Naruto watched the girl exit the shop before disappearing from their sight around a corner. Should we go after her? Kaneko questioned worriedly after several seconds of silence. She turned to Naruto only to see him giving her a shake of his head while a small smile played against his lips. Not right now. She'll come back if she needs us. For now, let her be. The blonde stated as the fox perched on his shoulder nodded along to his words. Kaneko rolled her eyes at the strange sight before giving one last glance back towards the door. She would have Naruto and her friendship with Akino in order to move forward. Now that's the type of girl you hate to see leave but love watching her go. If you know what, the drunken man's perverted statement came to a quick and conclusive end when a half-eaten cookie managed to slip into his open mouth and down into his throat. The treat got stuck halfway into its journey, causing the man to hack and spit in a vain attempt to dislodge it. It became very clear to the man that his efforts were for naught as his face began to turn an unpleasant shade of blue. Odin-sama, you idiot. The dating duo heard the choking man's remaining escort say before slowly sauntering towards his choking form. She stood over his hunched position for several seconds while a disappointed and disgusted gleam shone brightly in her eyes. Then suddenly, without any warning, she brought her hand up before bringing it crashing down onto his back. At the moment of impact, the cookie went flying out of the man's mouth and smacked against the noise with a wet flopping sound. That is disgusting. The woman said as the now revealed Odin collapsed to his knees. His face was slowly returning to its original color as he sucked in huge gulps of air. From the corner of his eye, Naruto could see several of his customers getting up from their seats and creeping towards the entrance. They were no doubt a little put off by the sight of an old man hacking up cookies in the middle of the meeting. Thank you so much, Rossweiss. The man all but yelled as he began to climb to his feet. I'm surprised you actually knew what to do in that situation. After all, a boyfriendless girl like yourself probably doesn't have much experience with gag. Odin found hugging the ground once more as the girl's closed fist came slamming onto his back. A loud huff left his mouth as she then proceeded to begin stomping against his back. Shut your mouth, you dirty, useless, worthless perverted god. The woman growled out as she continued her stomping. At the counter, Kaneko and Naruto shared a look with each other as Odin suffered beneath the heel of his bodyguard. Did she just say Odin? Naruto asked his girlfriend in a low tone. Kaneko could only nod silently at his question as she watched the supposed god get manhandled by his guardian. This couldn't be the same Odin, king of Asgard and god of the Nords. This drunken pervert couldn't have been the same person who rode the steed, Sleipnir, and contained the knowledge of the universe. It just couldn't be. I'm not dirty nor useless. I climbed Yggdrasil for God's sake, you boyfriendless Vergak. A particularly large glob of golden blood came flying out of the man's mouth as the woman landed a very hard stomp onto his back. Kaneko could only sigh as the god's words only confirmed her sinking suspicion. She had met yet another god and he turned out to be yet another pervert. We've all heard it. 9 days and nights. When will you stop talking about it? The woman sighed before bending down and grabbing the scruff of Odin's cloak. With an almost practiced ease, she lifted him up into the air before deftly throwing the god over her shoulder. I apologize, Candy-sama. He had too much to drink and didn't mean any disrespect. We'll be on our way now, the woman said as she turned to face the duo. She gave a small bow to them both before turning on her heels and walking out the door. All the while, Odin sat content on her shoulder, his eyes continuously trailing south to the rear end of his handler. The duo walked for several moments in silence, catching the attention of several pedestrians, before disappearing around the same corner Akino did minutes ago. Why did she call you Candy-sama? Kaneko questioned several moments after the duo disappeared from the shop. Her response came in the form of a frustrated mumble as he began to punch angrily at a pile of dough. Stupid evil angel and their stupid plans. The Nekasho managed to pick out from the blonde's incomprehensible mumbling. The girl could only shake her head at her boyfriend's behavior before returning to her seemingly never-dwindling plate of cookies. Her boyfriend was weird and sometimes it was better to just not ask question. After all, something crazy would happen soon enough that would show her the truth. This was Naruto we're talking about, after all. It was another day and thus, another morning in the surrounding forests of Kuo for Naruto. He was in a brand new area, having completely purified the chakra in the original clearing. His eyes were closed and his breathing was steady as he drew in the surrounding natural chakra. Perched on his shoulder was the same fox from the day before. The creature seemed to be in its own meditative state as it laid on the broad shoulder of the blonde with its own eyes closed. The duo made for a rather good-looking pair as they sat in their serene states within the center of the clearing. The serenity of the moment was shattered as a light giggle rang out through the clearing. Naruto's eyes shot open as the melodious sound seemed to rebound throughout the forestry. The fox on his shoulder was slow to react as it gave a long, weary yawn as Naruto rose to his feet. The blonde seemed to be on high alert as he began to scan the clearing's edge in an attempt to deduce the origin of the sound. So this is the candy god I've heard so much about. You look as sweet as your moniker makes you out to be. A harmonious voice suddenly replaced the giggling. The person's voice was distinctly male, but it carried such a sweetness to it that Naruto almost mistook it for the female. Despite the sweetness, the blonde could sense a strong undertone of power ringing out through his words. This and the fact that someone had managed to escape his senses so well tipped him off that this wasn't some normal person. Another god. Naruto couldn't help but sigh to himself as the thought of dealing with another godlike being. His first meeting with the supposedly all-knowing king of Valhalla had left a rather sour taste in his mouth and he wasn't in the mood to deal with another god at the moment. Hey you! Come out of the trees so we can talk face to face. Naruto's words came out blunt as his limited patience reared his head. When silence greeted him, regret soon filled the blonde at the thought that he potentially pissed off yet another deity. His worries were put to a rather quick and uneventful rest however when he heard the soft plop of feet behind him. You're a straightforward one, aren't you? As soon as Naruto turned to face the man, his senses lit up like a flame. He found himself momentarily stunned as a mad rush of natural energy assaulted him. The person standing in front of him seemed to be a beacon for the stuff. His very presence breathed life into the surrounding areas. If there was any doubt beforehand, it had been wiped away from Naruto. He was surely in the presence of a god. The man's appearance did little to dissuade. The best way to describe the god would be as a beautiful youth. His curly hair and full beard were stained an earthly brown. His pointed ears twitched every so often as his green eyes stared down Naruto. A soft smirk played against his lips as his bare chest was pointed proudly into the air. One hand clutched a set of wooden pipes while the other tapped lightly against the furry lower half of the man's body. Overall, the god looked like a strange mixture between a human and a goat. I'm happy about that. The god started up again, briefly interrupting the blonde's observation. The rest of the gods can be so uptight sometime. Dionysus is the only one without a stick shoved up his ass. Sylvanus, Aya Chu, and Fry can be such prudes most of the time. What? Was the only thing Naruto could articulate after hearing the man in front of him speak. He only understood about half the words that came out of the god's mouth. The rest was mere gibberish that made zero sense to the blonde. Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot to introduce myself. The man looked genuinely apologetic as he spoke. The bashful look didn't last very long, however, as in the next instant, the god raised his flute up to his lips. Before Naruto could even begin to question what he was about to do, the man began to play. The heavenly sound that flowed out of the pipes was enough to almost put the shinobi in a trance. If the god had decided then to try and slit his throat, he may have actually succeeded. The effects of the music were similar to a genjutsu, and it took everything in Naruto not to fall into its full lull. I am Pan, Greek god of the wild, nature and the mountains. It is very nice to meet you. Pan sung in an equally as pleasant tone as his flute. Naruto could do nothing but blink owlishly at the introduction. Its uniqueness was on par with Jiraiya's. Hello. My name is Na. No need to introduce yourself, my friend. Naruto found himself interrupted once again as Pan seemed to almost warp into his personal space. The man was radiating happiness as he flashed the blonde a pearly white smile. I know about you. We all have. Naruto Uzumaki, the candy sage. Tamer of Ophis and slayer of the fallen angel, Kokabile. Able to elude angel, devils and fallen angels alike. God of nature and sweets, an odd combination, if I say so myself, but its oddness makes you unique. At the mention of his titles, Naruto wanted to release a groan as realization stumbled upon him. Instead, he swallowed down the urge and looked the god straight in the eye. I am not a god. Naruto's tone was firm and conclusive. His response came in the form of a blank expression as, for the first time since meeting, Pan went quiet. This treasure didn't last for very long as the nature god soon burst into a fit of laughter. An irritated mask dawned itself upon the blonde's face as the god's laughter continued for a solid minute before slowly tapering off into a set of giggles. I'm sorry for laughing, but that is honestly a first. I've never heard a god deny their godhood before. Pan said in between his giggles, serving to only agitate the blonde further. I'm not denying my godhood. I'm just not a god. Naruto shot back. Yeah, you are. No, I'm not. Yeah, you are. No, I'm not. If you're not a god, you shouldn't be able to block this. Pan's words were the only warning Naruto got before the man disappeared from his sight. An instant later, the blonde twisted around and caught the hairy leg of the god moments before it would have slammed into the back of his skull. Pan had a wide grin on his face during it all. Even when Naruto proceeded to send him slamming roughly to the ground. What the hell was that? Naruto shouted as he stood over the downed god. The laughter that followed his questioning only served to drive his anger even further. It was a test and you passed. Pan exclaimed before sinking into the earth. Naruto let off a solitary blink before turning again. His eyes immediately locked onto the god who was now leaning casually against a tree with his ever-present grin still on his lips. Not many people can even begin to dodge my attacks when I'm in my natural element. You blocked it. That shows you're special. Before Naruto could speak up in his defense, Pan was once again in his face. I can feel it inside you. Nature is in love with you and you with it. There's no denying that. You can't hide from the wild. I can feel it roaring inside you. It's in love with you. It follows you with each step and breathes with every beat of your heart. You two are so in tune that it's making me jealous. Pan's voice raised to an almost frantic level as he shouted in Naruto's face. The groan that Naruto held back before now came flowing from out of his lips at the god's words. This was not supposed to happen. This is exactly what he did not want. I can't wait to see how you'll turn out. The god continued to speak, completely unaware of the strife his audience was going through. Maybe you'll join another pantheon. We could use another nature god. Though, you look like you'll fit in better with the Nords, maybe even the Japanese. Maybe even a new pantheon. Oh, that would be interesting. Hopefully you don't have to go through the whole crucifixion thing like Jesus did. That looked painful. Jupiter enjoyed that kid's torture a little too moo. Shut up. Naruto finally shouted out. His words served to finally silence the nature god. With his newly acquired silence, the blonde took the time to sigh. This was quickly becoming too much to handle. Being a god wasn't all it was cut out to be. Can you just leave? I need some alone time to process all this. Naruto managed to force out after several moments of silence. He needed some time to process this all, and the Greek god's presence wasn't helping whatsoever. That's fine. But don't expect it to last very long. I'm sure the rest of the gang are already on their way to greet you. Even Artemis will eventually find some time away from her troops to come say hi. You better believe it. Before the blonde could question the god about using his catchphrase, Pan sunk into the earth, masking his presence more. Naruto was once again left in the clearing with his fox companion, more confused as ever as the morning sun continued its slow climb into the air. More gods. The blonde mumbled before falling to his ass. If what Pan said was true, he had to expect several more visits from gods. If any of them were as lively as the Greek god was, he was in for a major headache. Why can't life be more simple? The blonde muttered to himself seconds before his head was consumed by a cloud of smoke. Nothing could ever be simple for Naruto Uzumaki. That's it for part 6. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.